experience is always a positive experience, and it's something which is much more engaging. My name's Dr. Martin Quigley. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Psychology at Swansea University, and I teach and research on topics ranging from learning and behaviour, personality, individual differences, and aspects of clinical psychology. So my first experience was working with the chaps from 𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗹𝗲𝗆, where we teamed up to develop a virtual reality exposure therapy task. So the purpose of this task was to introduce some clinical psychology aspects which were grounded in theory and good scientific practice about how to help people with certain phobias. And in this case, it was arachnophobia, so a very common bidophobia. And I worked with Jack, who did a brilliant job of developing an incredible app that could be used by our students. And they actually went above and beyond and developed a few different iterations or variations of that. And we've worked together since then, also developing some gambling virtual reality tasks as well, including things like slot machines, which we're continuing at the moment. Since then, after actually working on that arachnophobia app, I then invested in a 𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗆 myself. I was convinced by the abilities there, and I've had to play around and so forth, but mainly it's been in relation to teaching. So one of the unique advantages of using VR, particularly in the discipline of psychology, is it allows us to simulate contexts or environments which are otherwise difficult to provide. So if we're thinking about this from a therapy perspective, if we wanted to provide someone with potentially exposure to some things that they may be afraid of, if they have a phobia or anxious about things like particular insects or animals or environments, it's hard to do that in reality from a time perspective, a cost perspective, and actually getting access to some of these things. VR allows us to do that in a cost-effective and efficient way in a safe environment. And we know from the empirical literature that it can be very effective. So it can serve as a bridge there to allowing people to start therapy in a meaningful way whilst balancing out those costs and those practical issues. What's really interesting about that is the enthusiasm, and I can say that with 100% genuine sincerity about the experience. It's always a positive experience, and it's something which is much more engaging than sitting them down in front of a desktop and getting to read something or to type away or to click and respond. So I'm thinking in terms of like research studies here, where we've used this for research purposes and teaching purposes. They've always enjoyed it. It's one of the few instances where we'll run a study or a teaching session and people want to do it to the extent that we're actually having to manage the volume of people that we can fit within there, which typically isn't the case for more standard forms of teaching, assessment and research. Having customizable instances that we can clearly adapt for the purposes of our cohort is really important. Having something off the shelf can work, but if you can have something bespoke where you have control over the different variables and factors that are relevant to you, can be incredibly powerful, both in terms of how you can, the range of opportunities available to you, but also the flexibility moving forward so that you're not locked into a particular system or approach, that you can change things. We all know in education and research is changing agendas. There's factors that emerge that we perhaps don't anticipate, and being able to customize the technology to suit our needs is going to really help in terms of how efficient and responsive we can be to things then. Genuinely incredible. It's really refreshing to work with such talented people who are so professional, who can see the big picture, who are very flexible, approachable, and just talented at what they do. It's very rare to find that combination of skills and talent there. So a genuine pleasure, and I can't recommend the experience enough to anybody. You can't underestimate the power of actually having some form of interactive engagement in a simulated environment where you can practice things out, you can test things, you can get immediate feedback, you can observe this yourself through video recordings and transcripts, and that can really bring to life research, both from the user or the participant experience and also from the researcher when talking about that at conferences and to funders and collaborators. It really does bring to life the research in a different way than perhaps more sort of standard or conventional research forms. So one of the big issues in academia at the moment is in generating what is referred to as authentic assessment. So these are assessments which translate into the real world and increase students' employability. So moving beyond the traditional essay or exam for a few different reasons. One of them is in relation to the challenge of AI. Now it's often difficult to assess the authenticity of the work that's created and if it's actually the students' work. Virtual reality offers a way of overcoming those issues. It allows us to test people in an authentic manner, things which translate to real-world environments in a safe situation which can be simulated, but it also allows us to overcome that issue of AI being a problem with things like essays and science reports and so forth, by actually assessing things like their ability to interact with a potential patient or fictitious scenario, and to actually look at how to reflect back on their own experiences, what their interaction was like, as they can see recordings of that, or to also see things like the transcript, their actual interaction and what they said during that particular scenario. Yeah, I think some of that is finding the right people. I think that's a really big challenge, and that can help. Obviously, if you've got a good connection there, if you've got access to people like Immersive who have that experience and that data set of knowledge, essentially, they're from working on various different collaborative projects across different disciplines within a university, that really helps. You need those good contacts and connections, and also to make sure that staff within an institution are also provided time to realise the opportunities that are there, to see how easily these VRs can be slotted into teaching, into modules, into research projects, into grants. It really is rather straightforward to do that, but you need someone to really sort of open the gates and to show people how simple that process can be and what the opportunities are there as well. So what's really helpful is in terms of how VR can help research stand out, particularly when thinking about grant applications and so forth, and some of the challenges we face in the future as a society. VR allows us a process by which we can examine some of these issues through the research projects that we do in a really cost-efficient way. It really helps stand out in terms of a very competitive field when we're applying for research grants with some of the most important research funders out there. So it really gives us an opportunity to stand apart and to offer something unique in the research grants that we are writing and developing. Historically, there may have been barriers in terms of practical, simply having access to the equipment or the technology and so forth, but that is obviously the issues they are reducing with time as these becoming more widespread and generalized and more people have simple access and so forth. And also, I think the technology, the pace at which things have moved, have made that easier and easier. So there's no practical hurdles where Once it may have been that people felt disorientated after a certain amount of time, or the mounted headset may have been a particular heavy feeling or sensation, etc. Lots of those things are being ironed out now, which make it much more accessible and straightforward to use, and most people will be able to have access to those equipment, certainly in higher education institutions where they're becoming mainstream. I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see increasing adoption of immersive technology within the education system. I think that's already begun, but I think in the next 5 years, we'll see that become much more mainstream and embedded within courses, modules, a variety of different degree programs. And I think that will come from changes in society which facilitate or leverage the use of those technology, but also from demand from students, from educators, as they see the benefits of the technology and realize that it can be both effective in terms of pedagogically as a teaching tool, as a research tool and so forth, but also efficient in terms of the processes and demands on their time. We all are under pressure to do many things, and if there's ways in which we can increase the time that, reduce the time that it takes to do that, that would be incredibly beneficial. I think that will be a big factor there as well, weighing into that.